Welcome back guys for your weekly dose of Cyberpunk 2077 news. Today we're going to be rounding up all the details, screenshots, and content from Night City Wire episode 2 that have been trickling in from around the web, a new interview on the weapons and gunplay in Cyberpunk 2077 with senior gameplay designer Powell Kapala, a couple new Q&As with Powell Sosko, Philip Weber, and Miles Tost from the 2077 Discord, and a brand new track from the legendary in-game band Samurai. First up, we have the release of Night City Wire episode 2 featuring the Lifepath trailer, a dev diary on Refused and their role as the in-game band Samurai, as well as a weapons trailer showcasing the firepower in 2077. I absolutely love this episode. It really reminded me of the scale and scope of this game, and the design and art direction really is just incredible. These new screenshots are an embodiment of the detail and care CDPR have taken in crafting these environments and characters, and this game will truly be some eye candy, whether you're running it on RTX or not. The first screenshot we have is of an Arasaka agent and his posse questioning V in the Corpo Lifepath before stripping him of everything. Notice how the prompts on screen are keys and not gamepad buttons. Next we have an Arasaka mega building with a propaganda film being played in the background. Apparently Arasaka forces prevented mass riots, or so they've made it seem in San Francisco in 2071. Next we have a combat scene with some gangers out around what appears to be Santo Domingo. It seems like you're using thermal ammunition, as well as what seems to be a high-powered long-range DMR. There's also a shot out in the Badlands in a nomad camp, as well as the fixer Kirk and Padre from the Street Kid Lifepath. V, who seems to have a level cap of 50, is shown wreaking havoc with some frenetic explosions, as well as carrying a heavy Militech turret in a face-off against this Maelstrom. Finally, we have the nomad Lifepath when you're interacting with the sheriff. Again, stunning pictures. You're definitely going to want to experience this in the highest fidelity possible. Next up on the list, we have an interview with Powell Kapala, the senior gameplay designer at CD Projekt Red, where he reveals a ton of new information on the weapons of Night City. When asked if there was any particular games that CDPR used as inspiration for Cyberpunk 2077's gunplay, handling, and combat, Kapala responds that they paid attention to nearly every game that had come out in the last couple of years. He mentions that most games on the market have the opposite take on what CDPR plans to do. They're more of a shooter with RPG elements, whereas 2077 is more of an RPG with shooter elements. Despite this, there were some inspirations in a couple of recent major titles, but he doesn't mention them by name. Because shooter mechanics like recoil and spread in RPGs have to scale to make the player feel a sense of progression as he or she levels up and increases weapon proficiency, most time was spent on creating the RPG systems around this. When it comes to starting off the game, Kapala mentions that spread will not totally be out of control, so much so that the player will feel frustrated. They have opted for a tighter spread for the beginning, since it's not something you can mechanically control, and thus in comparison to recoil, which you can have some autonomy over, will scale to a lesser degree than recoil to make it more enjoyable. It is still balanced, however, to give the player a sense of progression. They still want variables to be tweakable enough where you can't just mechanically brute force your way into and out of situations with superior aim. When it comes to how reactive the environments are and how they respond to damage and bullets, Powell claims that there is a ton of emphasis in destructible environments, from something as simple as breaking glasses and beer bottles in shootouts and bars to destructible cover. They really wanted to make the environment look like it's been in a shootout after the dust is settled, and many assets are destructible. The best example from this is if you hit a pipe with water in it, water will start to leak or spray out of it. This apparently extends to nearly every object that is in the game. Now, not too long ago, there was a claim made that around 3/4 of the assets may be destructible, and in our interview with Miles Tost on the Community Podcast, he mentions that in development, they've scaled up environmental destructibility, which is something I am super happy about. Character deaths are dependent upon the strength of the weapon you are using. A pistol would not ragdoll an enemy, but a grenade explosion will, with limbs becoming dismembered and getting flung around based on physics. If you're using an LMG for example, you will again see variance in NPC deaths, since it is more powerful than a pistol, but not as explosive as a frag. Legendary weapons can be obtained in quests, but Kapala mentions that they don't want this to feel artificial or for it to just drop out of the sky. They do want it to be connected to choice, and he uses the example of helping corporate agent Stout. Helping her in a certain way may net you a legendary weapon, but it's based on a continued relationship, and you'll never know from the outset if a reward is tied to forging these relationships. The legendary weapons that you get are very different, and they give you a feeling of connection with the NPC that you've got it from. In response to a question regarding if you can upgrade early to mid-game legendary weapons, or weapons in general that you've grown to love, Kapala mentions that you can do this. However, there are so many weapons that they don't want the player using the same weapons over and over again. Different weapons will also fit different playstyles, with some being more solo oriented and others that are more fit for a stealthy character. Within the confines of the RPG elements, a question is asked if weapons that are more associated with stealth and discrete playthroughs feel the same sense of scaling and power. Introducing bigger and louder weapons is one thing, But how do players on the other end of the spectrum feel that power increase? Kapala mentions that early on they decided on a system where if you use a weapon, you will become better at it, giving you points to spend your way to a higher proficiency. Because the fluid class system allows you to adopt a hybrid style, and because of the situations where it isn't expected of the player to play any missions with stealth or in a guns blazing approach, you can choose where to invest those points to feel this increase in progression. CYBERWARE was also implemented to further increase the variety in how you tackle an encounter, again allowing for more player agency and options. There is a limitation in some pieces of CYBERWARE, for example between the Mantis Blades, the projectile system, and the Gorilla Arms. Because they are rebuilds of your entire arm, you have to make the choice on which one you want to install. Kapala also notes that in the beginning of the game, V is an unknown new mercenary, making Night City very difficult, and you'll need to utilize all your tools to defeat encounters. There will be many encounters, for example the Max Tack and the Trauma Team, that you will likely not survive. Approaching each encounter in a logical and smart way is the key. You wouldn't approach a helicopter with the katana because that just doesn't make sense, so be prepared for your playstyle to change in alignment to what's happening all around you. The interviewer goes on to ask about the state of melee, since the consensus seemed to be that it was lacking in some areas. Kapala mentions that they are still a couple months out from release and that they are currently working on it. They're spending time to perfect it since they are not 100% happy with it, and he says it will get better. When it comes to targeting different areas on enemies' bodies, the senior gameplay designer adds that there are a couple different hit reactions per body part of the NPCs. You can shoot them in the kneecaps or legs and they will limp, you can blast off their arms, and if you injure them they may drop their two-handed weapon in favor of a one-handed or lighter weapon. Bullet sponginess was a standout question, and how to balance a challenge without adding unnecessary frustration. Kapala mentions that there will be different rarities of NPCs, and if you are meeting regular goons and you're on par or around their level, you will never experience bullet sponginess. They will go down quite fast and you'll also go down quite fast, so you'll have to utilize cover and move around a lot. Some other higher tiered NPCs will have armors or subdermal plating and will be elite enemies who can take more punishment. What they've opted to do here is add hit reactions to the NPCs that are on par with how much damage you're doing. Bullet sponginess, in Powell's opinion, is made worse because there's no visual feedback of impact when shooting the enemy. They just absorb bullets and keep on moving. NPCs in 2077 will get hurt, they will stumble, and they will fall from gunfire. As far as boss fights go, he doesn't want to spoil things, but he ensures that they will not feel like bullet sponges. Manufacturers will have respective qualities, and there is a grid of how prolific each manufacturer is in Night City. You can find old-schooled weapons like the double-barreled shotgun from Serbian company Rostovic, but you can also find higher quality manufacturers like Arasaka and Militech making higher tiered weapons for the corporations and their forces. You will be able to feel the refinement and quality of these weapons, as recoil will be more manageable, spread will be smaller, and they will sound more like well-oiled machines. Kangtao is also a very prominent corporation, emerging as a result of their smart weapon technology. When it comes to complete source material ports from Cyberpunk 2020, there will be some familiar weapons with a CDPR spin on it, and they're not shying away from them. They do, however, want to keep things in line with how the world would behave and evolve in the 57 years since Cyberpunk 2020. Moving on, we have a couple new developer Q&As with Powell Sasko and Miles Tost in the Cyberpunk 2077 Discord. Big thanks to Netrunner 2077, Paradonkel, and Azuro for compiling all this information. Moving into the Sasko interview, the first question was if the Johnny Silverhand sequence we saw in Night City Wire Episode 2 was part of a brain dance. Sasko mentions that he can't comment on this and that players will have to find out. The next significant question was that if side quests offer the same amount of choice as the main story. Sasko responds that it depends. If it makes sense for the plot to have that much choice, then yes. Their core principle here is always that they want to give the player as much choice as possible, but at the same time staying reasonable because there is a certain budget for all these branches. They also want the natural options to be present. If you think you can do something, you can likely do it, unless it erodes what the narrative is trying to convey. He also mentions in collaboration with community manager Lalea that they are confident in a November 19th launch. Responding to a question about his favorite district, Sasko thinks that it has to be Japantown, because it has the most interesting architecture in his opinion. All the districts, however, have their own treats in store to surprise the player. In a question about some information from the past, where it was mentioned that you can finish the game without finishing the main plotline, Sasko mentions that he would love to clarify on that, but he mentioned that it will probably make headlines and the internet will inevitably run wild with it. It is correct, but it depends on your definition. When you decide to do side content, it opens up new paths that allow you to finish the game in more ways than was previously closed, and that was the gist of it. There were some mistranslations and stretching, and if you were to clarify further, it might add more confusion. Next question was about roadblocks and the world book mentioning that there are blocks around Watson, and if these actually appear in gameplay. Sasko mentions that there are some parts that won't be accessible due to story elements. Outside of that, there are scenarios where there are roadblocks which might require the player to get around on foot instead of on a bike or vehicle. It's just a suggestion, however, and at the end of the day, you will be able to choose. Moving on, we have a question about this particular scene featuring V fixing his pistol, and if this is an example of a third-person cutscene. Pablo responds with this is in the game and it's called the first equip, which is a cool animation you get for a new item you've obtained. It was cut like this for the trailer, but yes, this is actually in the game. Finally, we have a question on how to obtain clothes, to which the answer was through droppable loot and through vendors. Just as an aside from this interview, Sosco has also mentioned that the game is still a work in progress, likely to the very end, despite the work in progress bar not appearing on the tops of recent trailers from both episodes of the Night City Wire. Part 2 features senior level designer Miles Tost. First question was if the blocking of non-accessible buildings and doors is contextual, and if there are reasons why we can't physically enter some buildings and doors. Miles responds with we try to, but everywhere is not like that. They can't put a bouncer in front of every door, but in areas where it is super obvious, they will try to put something there. The amount of doors in Cyberpunk completely dwarfs Witcher 3 however. There are around 2,500 doors in The Witcher 3, and there are far more in 2077. The next question I found interesting was about the digital glitch mask characters, and if we know who they are, to which Miles responds with that we do know. Now a lot of people are thinking these are the Bozos, but I think for such an iconic gang, this design is too subtle. On top of this, the scavengers can be seen wearing these, and we have also seen them before, so this to me is a better possibility. Next we have a question on how many power weapons there are. Miles responds with that there are a ton of weapons, echoing what Kapala has also said. He does however take the time to reinforce that this is an RPG first and foremost, and choice, looks, skills, dialogue are the center of the experience. This is a game with a much deeper role-playing experience than The Witcher 3. That wrapped up the Tost interview, but we also have some additional comments from Philip Weber via Discord. We get some little tidbits here that all the footage so far is from the first few hours of the game, even with Night City Wire Episode 2, and not to ask about Wakako's ex-husbands. We also get some bigger details as well. In a question about if there are areas where weapons are not allowed, Weber responds that these areas exist, especially since they have the dynamic scene system at play. If you could do whatever you wanted at all times, they would have to do a full life simulator, but they do try to give you full freedom whenever possible. A question about NPC density came up and how empty the streets looked at night. Philip responds to this one by mentioning that this depends on the place, time, and some random factors. You can find empty places, but also bigger crowds across the city. Weber also mentions that his favorite part of the story features a foodie and big fishes, but he can't say more. Finally, Philip Weber took to the CDPR forums to mention that in regards to shotguns, he remembers being a big fan of the older Bungie titles, notably Halo 1 as having one of the best shotguns of all time, and that the gameplay team has nailed the feeling of shotguns in Cyberpunk. His personal favorite has not been shown yet, so there is cool stuff to look forward to. Moving on to some of the Samurai news, we have a new song by them, released post Night City Wire Episode 2, so check out this snippet. That's it for today's news. My Lifepath analysis will be out in the next couple days, so also look out for that one if you're interested in a frame-by-frame breakdown. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and for more Cyberpunk, join Neon Nation by subscribing to the Neon Arcade.